What if we left while we still liked each other? Maybe that there was still love. It doesn't mean romantic love and connection, but that's a very challenging idea. And it's a heartbreak to me that someone we did have a love story with, that we created these other lives, these children from love, that the divorce doesn't discount everything that came before it. But so often we wait until that pinnacle of high conflict and then everything crashes out. And then we're on fire.
Welcome to Divorce Dialogues. I'm Katherine Miller. This is where we have honest, thoughtful conversations about divorce, the emotional, financial, legal, and family questions no one prepares you for. From deciding whether to separate, to navigating the process with dignity, to rebuilding what comes next, Divorce Dialogues is here to help you find clarity, perspective, and a better way forward. Divorce is often framed as something you survive, something you get through, something to endure. And in many ways, that makes sense. It's disruptive, it's emotional, and it can feel like a loss of control. But that framing can also really be limiting because it assumes that divorce is just something that, well, it just happens to you, rather than something you have any real agency within. And what I've seen over and over again is that the way people approach the process, the mindset that they bring to the process, the decisions they make, and how they handle the conflict has a significant impact, not just on the outcome, but on how they experience the divorce itself and how they feel about themselves going through it. So the question really becomes, what would it look like not just to get through divorce, but to do it well, not perfectly, because none of us can, and certainly not without difficulty, because it is painful and it's hard, but in a way that is intentional, informed, and aligned with what actually matters to you. And that's what this conversation is really about. Divorce is often framed as something you survive, but if it could actually be something you do well. In this episode, I'm joined by Karen McNenny, the founder of the Good Divorce Academy, host of the Good Divorce Show, and author of the book, The Good Divorce. Through her work, Karen has built a framework and a platform dedicated to helping people navigate divorce with clarity, intention, and respect. And we're going to talk about what it really means to have a, quote, good divorce, why it's so hard to achieve, and how shifting your mindset can change not just the process, but your life after it. Welcome, Karen. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Katherine. I appreciate having a microphone to talk about this important topic.
I think that sometimes people think that a good divorce is an oxymoron, but I really don't think that it is. So what is a good divorce? What does that actually mean? And once we talk about that, I'd also like to know about how it's different from how most people experience divorce.
One divorce survivor to another, Katherine, what it means to me isn't even so much the divorce process. As you said, it is grief. Good doesn't mean easy. It's hard, it's emotional, it's complex, it's logistical. There's legal support that's needed, things most of us arrive and we're like, we don't know how to do this. But really, for me, the Good Divorce methodology and what my co-parent and I were seeking was really the good family post-divorce. And I think that's the platform that I'm trying to remind people that the divorce process itself is this one little thread in a complex tapestry that we call family. Now, if you don't share children, it's a little easier to cut things away and not have to interact again, not making it easy, but you don't necessarily have a forever relationship. But if you're divorcing your co-parent, chances are there's going to be graduations, weddings, grandbabies, holidays, moments that not only do you as parents deserve to delight and celebrate with your kids, but your kids also have the right to not have to negotiate their parents' BS on their wedding day because of damage that was done 5, 10, even 25 years earlier through the process. So the legal process of divorce and how we navigate it really is the incubator for the habitat that the family is going to exist in forever until it dissolves through death or other ways. So we're setting the stage, if you will, for that forever family structure.
And how do you think that differs from the way most people think about divorce?
Well, some of it is where we start. And often people identify the starting gate. Okay, we've decided to get divorced. Now what? Call an attorney. and we begin our conversation about finances. That's usually where attorneys are needed. It's where their strength area is. You know this. These are services that you provide, and we move into the fiscal and the division of assets. I really believe that if we put more focus on family before finances, we might have a better runway. And I spent 25 years as a business consultant, still do, as well as a divorce consultant. And whenever we're going to implement a big change in an organization, we look at project management. What's the right order of things to do to get the best outcome and to bring people along? And that also starts with communication. And one of the first things people will ask is, how do we tell our kids? We decided yesterday, we need to tell them tomorrow. I'm like, why do you need to tell them tomorrow? Because we decided. I'm like, well, you're not ready to have that conversation. Well, but we don't want to be deceitful. Deceit is different than discretion. And right now, there's some things that you all need to sort out amongst yourselves before you sit down with your kids. And I would even suggest that you do some preemptive communication with their teachers and coaches and grandparents, so that there is a circle of support that's ready to hold those kids, and that the kids don't have to become the messenger of our families getting a divorce. The people who love and care for them and spend a lot of time with them during their week also has that information. I like to see a parenting plan written before we start dividing assets. Otherwise, there's always the chance that the kiddos are going to end up on the negotiation table around time. So those are some of the perspective changing things that we found beneficial, and certainly with my clients, when we put an emphasis on family before finances. And there's a lot of coaching support and communication and the rupture of the relationship and how you're living, and if you're still under one roof, and all those things long before we even started discovery process, which can be emotionally very igniting for most of us, because we see divorce as a zero-sum game. There's going to be a winner and a loser. And I really like to see that more of a teeter-totter where we can get both parties balanced on the other side.
Yeah, it's interesting because money is really a way, it's a tactic to get to the result rather than the result itself. And if you think about it, like money is how we arrange to live in this place, or we pay for those vacations or for that school or whatever. And typically in negotiations, we think of it as the end result, and it's not. And I think what you're saying is, what if we think about what the result is we're looking for, and then we figure out the money as a way to make that happen?
The money's just another thing we have to do. But typically in our traditional narrative around divorce in America, where we're speaking, one, it means divorce is a weapon. That's the first thing I think we have to shift, is really to identify divorce is not a weapon. And it should not be used as a weapon. It's a tool of transformation. And most of us are sitting in a not great marriage, a dysfunctional marriage, a less than fulfilling marriage. And I think, okay, then the divorce should be the journey to make that better. That's why divorce exists, to make a not great thing better. Why would we spend tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, bleed our soul, destroy our relationship, and end up with a worse divorce than our bad marriage? I'd say just stay in your bad marriage instead of blowing everything up. And sadly, divorce often, that weaponizing, it sits on the shelf of marriage as a threat. We all have it there kind of in the shadow. And, oh, you said the D word. Am I going to put the D word on the table? Are we talking about the divorce? And I think just because we're talking about divorce doesn't mean we're going to have one. There is, I think, great wisdom for anybody who's getting married, who is married, who is educating themselves around what are we agreeing to in that marriage, and what might it mean if it were to unravel, to dissolve. And it's the same thing through that business lens. You never go into a business partnership and set up your LLC with your new business partners without also talking about, and now when this comes to an end. That doesn't mean we want it to come to an end. Just like when I get on the airplane, every time they're going to tell me, here's what you need to know if there's turbulence and we're going to crash, every single time. And we don't sit there thinking, why are the airlines so pessimistic? Why do they all think we're going to crash? Nope. And that's a shift that I think if more people could kind of take the threat out of divorce and then know when it is in the conversation, it doesn't need to become a weapon. And my understanding so often is that our attorneys are doing what they're trained to do. Correct me if I'm wrong, Katherine, which is to fight for their client, unless you're in collaborative law or in mediation. But if you're working with a litigating lawyer, they're going to do exactly what you're paying them to do, which is to fight for as much as they can get inside a system that is built on conflict, not cooperation. And they are incentivized financially by duration and escalation, not can we get this done quickly, right? It just continues. I'm 15 years post-divorce, and I'm grateful that we found our way. And I didn't start doing this work until 5 years ago. It was through the pandemic that I really came to revisiting a topic that I've been really passionate about. And I think that where we begin is often where we end.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say that all marriages end, whether it's by death or divorce. And the law has something to say about what happens when it ends, whether by death or divorce. The laws are different, but it definitely, I think, behooves people to understand that it will end and there will be a transition to a post-marriage life, at least for one of you. It's not the abnormal thing, it's the normal thing. That's what happens. And given the statistics, there's a good 50%, 46% chance that a first marriage will end by the age of 55. So it's much more likely than that the plane will go down.
Exactly. And yet we don't give it the same credence to look at it as education. And that's part of the work of the book. You and I, our podcast is trying to get people education around the process so that we don't arrive deer in the headlights ready to fight because that's the only thing we've ever been told or the only thing we believe is possible. And that's not true.
Yeah. Before we move on from this subject, I just want to mention the difference in divorce when you do or don't have children. So sometimes in our experience, and Karen, let me know if you see this differently, sometimes people come in and they were married for a few years, they don't have children, they just go their separate ways, and it's just kind of like a breakup. And they're like, okay, it's sad and it's painful, but it's not like a really big deal. And then when people have been married for a longer period of time, whether or not they have children or not, in some ways, if they don't have children, it's harder than if they do. And the reason for that, I think, I'm curious what you think, is that at least parents can agree we love our children. We have our care for our children in common. So we can set aside our own, potentially, we can compromise, or we can set aside our own version of what our ideal result would be because it's better for our kids. And that allows them to kind of come together, even if they disagree what the best thing is for their kids, and parents often do. But they can agree they love their kids more than anyone else on the planet does. And that is a unifying factor that can often help them align on other issues and other disputes. Whereas if they don't have children, and the struggle can often be to make sense of their lives, their marriage, without that unifying factor of the love for the children. So if there's a listener out there who's thinking, well, I don't have kids and my divorce is really hard and painful. Yeah, that is really hard and painful. And it's just as tragic sometimes and difficult and heartbreaking as it is when you do have children. So I didn't want to minimize that.
Absolutely agree. And I see the wisdom in recognizing that the children are sometimes the neutralizer that the parents can rally around. And when we don't have that, then it's just a battle. And sometimes it's a battle over the betrayal of love, a betrayal of the story, and sometimes of your partner. And, none of us get married setting out thinking that we'll be the one of the 46%. Nobody walks down the aisle thinking, well, this is good for today until the next thing happens. Yeah, that pain, not having children, does not minimize the experience, the grief, the loss, the re-identification, the disorientation that happens when you go from partnered to unpartnered. And I think we underestimate that as a society. I think in many ways we're neglectful of individuals going through divorce in terms of how we can support them and be more empathetic. I think for a while there's been a lot of shame and isolation around divorce. Like, you brought this upon yourself. You couldn't make it work. You're taking the easy way out. Like all of these misnomers. And if you haven't been through divorce, you might think it's the easy way out. But anybody who has will know that these decisions don't come quickly. They don't come easily. And they're definitely not often a path of ease. There's great challenges and duration in unraveling your love story and your life from another person.
Divorce Dialogues is brought to you by Miller Law Group. We believe divorce isn't just a legal process, it's a human transition. At Miller Law Group, we help people navigate divorce with dignity, clarity, and respect, focusing on conversations that lead to better outcomes for families. Learn more at miller-law.com. So where does the breakdown typically happen, do you think? Is it the emotional, communication-based, structural, and how the divorce is handled?
I think we could poke around to a number of things. I'm going to go way upstream with a challenging thought that the first thing we do wrong in our divorce journey is we stay too long. I think a lot of couples stay too long. And again, because of that social narrative of shame, isolation, you shouldn't, you gave vows, like we are such a change accepting culture. Change your job, change your hair, change the color of your hair, change where you live, change your name. Like so much support for a change centric culture, unless it's your marital status. Then we're not so supportive culturally. And there's a variety of reasons of why that comes about. So I think because of that, people sort of stay. And I think we also have a narrative that thou shalt not change your marital status and instigate a divorce unless the house is on fire. There needs to be infidelity. There needs to be abuse. There's a judge and jury that then justifies, okay, you get a pass. Here you go. Here's your hall pass to divorce. It's made up, but I think it exists. I think it existed in my own journey. Because I hear people all the time like, well, it's not like anyone's beating me. It's not like the money's being burned up in a strip bar every weekend. And I would suggest, Katherine, tongue in cheek, it's true. And that's why I say when we stay too long and we know our truth, it's like we see that off ramp and we keep driving by it and we make another loop and we keep driving by it. Well, eventually we start making it bad enough to leave. And then infidelity might pop its head up. Addiction might rear the ugly side of that behavior. There might be even just the insidious, I no longer see the good in my spouse. I only see, because it's true. We always see what we want to see. So now I'm making a list of, they don't leave the dishwasher right. They don't ever do this chore. They never cut the sandwiches the way the kids like the littlest, teeniest things now become these huge, grave betrayals of the domestic relationship. So I can make a list. I talk about this in the book. I have a little essay and it's called The 500, Not the 5. And I was coming home knowing my truth. Because I think a lot of times we know our truth long before we speak it. And again, we can't speak the word to even explore like, well, what if we separated? What would that look like? How would we live? What would the insurance look like? Our kids, what would we want for our kids? Like, I always say the best time to talk about divorce is before you need to talk about divorce. That's the time to talk about it.
That's why I like prenuptial agreements.
I agree. I think a prenuptial agreement should be part of every wedding package. I also think that every parenting plan should be written as soon as your children turn 1.
Not that I want to take us off on a tangent, but statistically speaking, people who have prenuptial agreements are less likely to divorce.
I love that statistic.
Right. So what does that say? It's not that it's the cynical, we're planning for the end of the marriage before it begins. It's that we're willing to plan for the marriage, including a possible transition when it ends. And again, as I said, all marriages end, whether by death or divorce. So
yeah. And those airplanes stay in the air because safety and early intervention and prevention is part of what keeps them in the air. I'm going to call that prenuptial. It's so wonderful. So coming back to this idea of where do we get it wrong? And I was just referencing something I reflect about in the book. And I would come home and I would just start seeing all the things that didn't get done while I was on my business trip. And Dad's home with the 3 and 5-year-old. I'm like, wow, you didn't do this and that didn't done and the laundry and the dishes. And he's like, you know what? It'd be really lovely if you came home and saw the 500 things I did while you were gone and not the 5 that I didn't. But I wasn't looking for the 500. I was looking for a way to write myself out of that marriage and felt that I needed to have justification to show the judge and jury in my own mind and maybe possibly even in my external community. Like, it's so bad. But really, what if we left while we still liked each other? Maybe that there was still love. It doesn't mean romantic love and connection, but that's a very challenging idea. And it's a heartbreak to me that someone we did have a love story with, that we created these other lives, these children from love, that The divorce doesn't discount everything that came before it, but so often we wait until that pinnacle of high conflict and then everything crashes out. And then we're on fire because you don't leave the house. It is a little mayonnaise jar, in the fridge, and you take it out and it's like, there's some mold in there, but most of the jar is good. So we wipe out the green flecks in the lid. We put the jar on, we stick it back in the fridge. We're like, I'm keeping that jar of mayonnaise. I'm not throwing that out. It is going bad. So how long do we let it go back before we fix it?
It's so interesting, Karen, because of course, I don't think either one of us is advocating leaving after one bite. And there is a maturation of a marital relationship that starts with what we call the honeymoon phase, where everything is wonderful. There's nothing that person can do wrong, and everything seems peachy and lovely. And your love matures. It's less exciting, maybe, as time goes by. So, like, finding that place where you have that realization that this is not working anymore, I think that's a challenging thing for people to do. And I think there is some guilt and shame around it, but there's also a sense after a period of time of, who am I not married to you? That identity thing that is also hard to kind of sort out. So for somebody who's at the beginning of thinking this, or is listening to us thinking, is my marriage over? Like, how should they think about that? And like, what should their mindset be about that?
Well, I'm no guru to tell anyone when their marriage is over or not, but maybe some things to pay attention to. One of which is I am a big supporter of couples counseling. I think we should fight for our marriages. I think early on we should get with professionals individually. Super helpful, know thyself, but you're always telling your own story when you're with your own therapist. But when you're together, and we arrive there with curiosity, like really trying to understand the other person. I think so often in marriage, and I've been doing mediation for a long time in corporate initially, before attorneys get called, come in and help people see what they're not seeing. Sometimes it's like we're sitting in the same movie theater watching really different movies, and you get out to the popcorn stand afterwards and someone's like, that was so fabulous. It doesn't. They're like, that was the terrible movie. Like, what? We're living in the same house in the same marriage, but that doesn't mean that we're living the same experience of that marriage. I often say, Katherine, my kids got through school and they had a lot of education about how to do long division and almost no education on how to have a difficult conversation. So we've got reading, writing, and arithmetic, and I want to see relationship added to that, like relationship literacy. So if you're thinking, is my marriage this, that, how are we doing that? Most of us come underskilled into our relationship world with our coworkers, our neighbors, the people who don't align with us religiously or politically. Like, we're not very good with healthy discourse. And then when it's in the marriage, like you said, healthy discourse is part of the good part. Sometimes when no arguing is happening, the fight is over, that can be a sign that you're done. There is nothing more to fight for. It could also be a matter of safety. And I want to make clear in a disclaimer, like you did, Katherine, that sometimes we find ourselves in a marriage that is violent, that is unsafe. There is an active addiction that is causing disruption. There are conditions in which absolutely go find yourself a Katherine Miller and get your protections in place. Mental health issues that aren't being addressed can be another situation in which kind of the good divorce hand in hand, let's walk down this aisle together, right? We fought for our marriage. Well, now fight for your divorce. And if you're with children, then you're fighting for your family. You're fighting for the future of that family. So you both can sit side by side at the Christmas concert and at the wedding and enjoy the grandkids. The idea that the marriage is ending, not the relationship. If you share children, your relationship continues. It's just being renovated. And the family absolutely continues. So diving into time with a therapist, if you are questioning the health of your marriage, can help you recognize, is this a growth period or is this a period of decay and we're on our way to death? And we can wait until it's stinking up everything, or we can recognize it and have a more elegant exit.
I mean, I think it's a reformation of the family. One of the things that I think is really, really interesting from a legal perspective, but also I think the law is finally catching up to where people are in terms of the definition of what a family is. and that a family does not mean a mom and a dad married to each other with 2.5 children, right? Like it is creative, and you are still, as a divorced parent, still family to your kids, which make you family to each other regardless of the circumstances. Somebody might be listening to this thinking, well, sometimes like the emotions are running high and the stakes feel so personal and it feels like I've got so much on the line, and that feels really vulnerable. So Karen, how do you help people stay grounded and focused on the goal even when that's happening and the emotions are swirling or all around?
Well, I think part of it is also giving ourselves permission to feel all the feelings, to know that there, as Catherine Woodward Thomas would talk about in Conscious Uncoupling, there's a rupture. And working with a coach, working with someone who is not just helping you disentangle the visible parts of the marriage, but also the invisible. And that might be your own support, and recognizing you're going through grief. There's this metamorphosis, as you identified, Catherine. Who am I without this person? Who am I without my kids 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? There's so many layers of grief that are taking place. So I know with my clients, just like normalizing the big emotions, finding an outlet. I'm one of the, I think, a rare breed that I work with both co-parents simultaneously. That's part of how you can do this better, is that it's not even the same side of the table. I call it a round table relationship. We're at the table together and there's chairs for our children or our business partners or our extended family. Lots of ways to look at that. And if we're sitting at that table knowing that my clients, I'm like, you're going to want to write a nasty gram one day. You're going to just be so irritated and so angry. And I'm going to tell you, write it, get it all out and send it to me. Don't send it to them. Send it to me. And I'm going to witness it and we're going to process it and you're going to beat your chest and your fist, because otherwise it's like a beach ball in the pool and you push it down and you push it down, and the deeper you push it, the more pressure it gains. And eventually that beach ball, boing, boing. You don't know when it's going to come up, where it's going to come up, who it's going to hit. So we're leaving a lot of the emotional pressure through the journey, which can be the value of, like with Catherine's team, when there's coaches and mediators and other professionals. Because I don't know about you, but I don't know very many attorneys who also have a master's in social work. There is a different skill set that supports the emotional, the invisible process in the divorce journey, that then helps you come to your wise mind, that executive function. Because all that emotional hijacking is our limbic brain, and it's going to happen. But if you try to deny it, I think you're in greater danger. So having an outlet to process the anger, the resentment, the betrayal, the grief, the sadness, the failure, all of those things along the way, then allows you, oh, now we have to make some decisions about our schedule with our kids and the financial picture of how we're going to support our kids and ourselves. And I think there's also can be a softening. I really delight when I get to the negotiation part, which sometimes is 3 months after working through some of this emotional journey and the house. And suddenly I hear a spouse say, you know what? I think I'm going to have greater earning power. I know my retirement's going to grow. I don't want to pull that from your retirement account. I really think you should sit with that. Or I want to make sure that they have the car that works better because I love tinkering on cars. I'll be okay. Like, you come back to this empathetic place of looking out for each other in the whole. Again, it's not a weapon. It's a breakup, and it's sad and emotional. So when there's opportunity to be thinking about the other, just asking that question of ourselves in the divorce process, how are they doing? Just that. How are they doing emotionally? How are they doing financially? And you might not get an answer and you don't even have to ask it. But as soon as you ask that inside yourself, first about your co-parent or the spouse you're divorcing, how are they doing? It shifts your mindset. And then together, if the two of you can keep asking that question about your children, how are they doing? How are they doing right now? And that's the goal. That's the only question you have to keep coming back to as parents. How are they doing about their new crush? How are they doing with the bully? How are they doing with their spelling test? How are they doing with their getting their driver's license? Like the things that kids still need by way of support from their parent team is to be able to come together on a regular basis. And because we love these children, more than anyone else on the planet will love them. It's us. How are they doing? And then we go from there.
For somebody who's listening, what is one reframe that can immediately shift how someone might approach divorce?
I'm going to highlight a couple things that we've talked about. One, divorce is not a weapon, it's a tool of transformation. Number two, you're not a broken family, you're a two-home family. You're just a two-home family, and the family continues. And then also to remember that everything will be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end. There's a long tail, a long shadow of divorce. And I hear many times, as maybe you do, Katherine, 5, 10, 50 people down decades like, oh my gosh, we just had coffee the other day, like old friends. We were reminiscing about, like, people often get there, whatever that might be. We're indifferent. That's what our therapist told us. Your goal is to become indifferent towards each other, which isn't the absence of feeling. It's that I don't get triggered by you anymore. I can see your nuances and the things that irritate me. And again, your spouse is the same person as your ex-spouse. Same person, same dynamics.
But that is the beautiful thing. That day, you're no longer triggered by them.
We're in charge of the gas pedal. You don't just have to wait for the long journey of time to do that work. You can also choose it. And if you're listening and thinking, well, I'm there, but they're not, I get it. Behavior is contagious. Emotions are contagious. So you can be the powerful one to just yield more, to bring more kindness, to bring more grace. And I'm telling you, in the right conditions and circumstances, it will catch on in your spouse, because as soon as we're both fighting, the fight continues. But as soon as one person gives up the fight, then it's not that interesting for the other person. And your good divorce is actually not dependent on the other person as you move forward and beyond the legal.
100%. All right, one last question. What's one thing that you wish people understood before they began the process of divorce?
You don't have to start with an attorney. That actually doesn't need to be your first call. Sorry, Katherine.
Well, if it is your first call, it should be someone who is going to help you understand what your options are.
That's right. Yep. To become educated, don't just dive in to the legal separation of assets. Divorce is more than that. And if people can understand that, again, if there's children involved, you have a forever relationship. So what is the foundation that you're building now? And to think of it as a tool to improve the family, not make it worse.
Great. Well, Karen, thank you so much for being my guest on Divorce Dialogues. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for, again, sharing the microphone and helping to amplify to all the families that there's other ways to approach this journey.
I have a few more reflections on my conversation with Karen McNenny about the good divorce, because as I said at the beginning of the show, many people do think of that as oxymoronic, meaning impossible, contradictory on the face of the term, but it's really not. Because so many people divorce. I mean, the statistics that I mentioned in the show, 46% of first marriages end in divorce by the age of 55, those are genuine statistics. And the statistics for second and third marriages are much, much worse than that. And by worse, I mean that more of those marriages end than 46%. And so is it possible to make that transition to a place of peace and serenity and future growth and even a good relationship? And I think the answer to that is yes. It's yes if you want it to be. If you're focused on the future, focused on making something positive out of the experience of going through this together. Because the thing about conflict, and divorce is, of course, a conflict, is that you and your ex are engaged in that conflict together. You share that conflict. You're both a part of it. And in order to bring it apart, you can do that intentionally, or you could do it with a saw. And if you do share children, yeah, that is a real reason to focus on doing it intentionally, carefully, and proactively building your future lives as co-parents. But even if you don't have children, you are disentangling a shared life. And that is worthy of respect. And it's worthy of honoring your own dignity of who you were as a married couple, who you were as a person married to the person that you're divorcing and who that person was and is, and what you respected and loved and cherished about him or her or them in the marriage and in the marital relationship. So I do think that when you are considering divorce, don't wait until you're screaming at each other all the time to consult a professional, to meet with a therapist. A therapist can help you much better earlier on when you first notice the breakdown in communication and the breakdown in the marriage. That's when you should go. There's no shame in seeking help to repair something. And once you do make a decision about ending your marriage, you should do that with intention and do the research. That while Karen McNenny says don't call a lawyer first, I think that the question is you could call a lawyer first, but make sure you're calling a lawyer who's not just going to sign you up for the War of the Roses or Kramer versus Kramer or some litigation train that cannot be stopped, that does treat the negotiation as a zero-sum game and seeks to escalate rather than de-escalate the conflict between you. There is so much there and so much possibility for what a good divorce looks like. But what a good divorce looks like for one person might be very, very different than what it looks like for another person. And it's worth thinking that through as well. If this conversation was helpful, share it with someone who might need it. And if you're navigating divorce yourself, you'll find more resources and episodes at miller-law.com. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.